My research has been in the area of decision support and decision aid. Yet, since the 80s, I have had at least some interest in behavioral issues in decision making, particular multi-criteria decision making. And there's a practical reason. Namely, I have always felt that we can do a better job supporting people in their decision making if we have a better understanding of how decisions are actually made. And my topic will be related to behavioral issues in multi-criteria decision making. I'll just have one slide about background, because I always like to give credit to the forefathers. Then I have a couple of slides about doing experimental research in our field, as I'm trying to provide you some of my words of wisdom. Then I will effectively, in an outline, very aggregate manner, talk about 4 different papers. But I won't get into details. I'll give you the references, but I'll try to get you at least one message across to you per paper. Okay. Thank you. Okay. I believe that Ward Edwards can justly be credited as the father of behavioral decision research. He wrote 2 influential papers. The first in 1954, well, he wrote more than 2, but in 1954 he wrote, in 1961 he wrote papers on behavioral decision theory. The 1954 paper introduced the subjective expected utility model. And in that same paper he asked, I think, a good question, that do people actually behave in this manner? But then I think the 1961 paper introduced the term behavioral decision making, or behavioral decision theory, as a new topic. I think what Edwards' influence has been great, even though perhaps he hasn't quite gotten the credit that he deserves. We know one of his students, Detlev von Winterfeld. There are other major contributors in this field. Of course, Herbert Simon did pioneering work in the mid-50s about so-called bounded or limited rationality, where he strongly advocated that human capacity to make, or his cognitive and computational capacity is severely limited to be able to follow the expected utility model. Of course, the two other scholars that I'd like to mention are Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, who wrote in the 70s and 80s many papers on biases, framing, and prospect theory. Daniel Kahneman received the Nobel Prize in Economics, and I think it was 2002. But Amos Tversky would, I believe, have shared the prize with him, but he had died prior to the occasion. Okay. All right. It's very natural in this field to conduct experiments. The whole bunch of issues arise when you want to conduct experiments. Well, first, where to recruit subjects? Students or managers? I have used both. I think I've used more students than managers because they're simply more available. But now I'm learning that, in fact, the psychology students are excellent, because at least in Finland, probably in the world, as part of their curriculum, they have to participate in a certain number of experiments, simply as part of their studies. And there are lists where they can sign up. And any of you are psychology students? No? I wanted to verify my theory, but that's what they tell me. That so contact psychology departments if you need subjects. How many? Well, it really depends on the task, how tedious it is. Sometimes you are lucky if you get 30 to 40 students, but I think that's the minimum. If you can easily get 100 or 200, why not? we have used various multi-criteria problems, choosing washing machines, choosing homes, students choosing between grades and credit points, and whatever. But I think the problem is probably even less important, but it has to, if you use students as subjects, the problem has to be something that the subjects can relate to. But if you have a managerial problem, then it's better to use managers. And we have lately been using simple choice problems where the subjects have been choosing between product baskets. Last we did was an experiment between choosing fruit baskets. We had oranges, apples, bananas. We had, in fact, in my office 120 kilos of fruit, and I was worried it's going to get ruined. But that's, it's not a bad thing. It's a multi-attribute choice where people normally have preferences. In fact, that led us to a new concept, namely hedonistic versus utilitarian products. I don't know if you're familiar with the distinction. Utilitarian products are such as pencils that you use for some utilitarian purpose. They don't convey great emotions. Hedonistic products are consumed for pleasure. Well, like, music is for enjoyment. And interestingly, we did a recent experiment where normally it's not believed to be important what type of product you're choosing between, but apparently it makes a difference. And now I forget the results, but Tommy helped me. What was the result? The people were more consistent with hedonistic products when they have a strong emotional attachment. So it may matter. Yeah. Well, I thought that was interesting. Well, we need to motivate the subject, and I think that's one of the key lessons that I'm learning from psychology colleagues. And what they normally do in the experiments, they let the subjects keep one of their choices. Just to motivate them to be serious, but they know that they have to they have to live with one of their choices. But if the subjects are making 100 choices, it's probably expensive to give them all 100 choices. But what they normally do, they randomize one and give them one, which is better than nothing. And of course, the more valuable the package is, the easier it is to recruit subjects. When we use poor psychology students as subjects, and our package was some 75 euros, we had no trouble getting student subjects. I think even $20 would motivate some. And 20 in Finland is a limit, because if the value of the package that you give to students exceeds 20 euros, you have to declare tax on it. So it's getting a little complicated. But we had 75 euro worth packages, and we paid the taxes, and then that's also fine. But it's of vital importance to motivate the subjects. Then the one reasonable question is what performance measures to use. If you're making multi-criteria, multi-attribute choices, one thing that you naturally focus on is dominance. That how many dominated solutions, which is bad if people make dominated choices, and then if they make non-dominated choices, that's better. And Tommy has a poster. Tommy, would you raise your hand? Tommy is one of our PhD students, and he has a poster about one of the papers that I'm just talking in a very aggregate manner. When he describes our dominance-based measure, which is kind of neat, that we have objective criterion for choices. Because in the past, often, I mean, what you can do is you can ask the subject which how do you like the final choice, or were you happy with the final choice on a Likert scale, or which is maybe not ideal. But anyway, that's the performance measure is something that you have to worry about. And if you're testing different preference elicitation techniques or different multi-criteria interactive methods, then you have to worry about order effects. Please be careful that you don't fall for order effects, because order matters. Then you have to randomize the order. But these are just some of my words of wisdom. And I recently learning, because I've been reading Kahneman's book, what's the name? Thinking
Fast and Slow.
Thinking Fast and Slow. He likes to develop theories, and I think it's marvelous if we can develop some simple or less simple theories of choice behavior. I think that should be the ultimate goal: develop some choice theories. Okay. Now I'm going to briefly talk about 4 different papers, but in a very aggregate outline manner. And this represents the first in line of my behavioral decision research papers, which were published in Annals of Operational Research 1990, with 2 colleagues, Pekka Korhonen from Aalto BIS and Herbert Moskowitz from Purdue University. And the idea was there to, and I'll talk about it soon, was to tie in prospect theory with making choices. And we also published a book, so-called Rocky Road to Publishing in the Management, Decision Sciences and Beyond, recently by Springer, where we took 2 case studies. One case study was this 1990 paper, because already then we decided that if that paper is going to have a happy end and find its way to a publication, decent publication, we would want to publish the whole story, the submissions to different journals, the rejections, the correspondence with the editors and the reviewers and all the review reports, and that's what we did. And then Springer wanted to have us incorporate a more modern story as well, which we did. So the book consists of two stories, and we think that it's hopefully helpful for graduate students to see how you write a research paper. Because normally you might get the impression that the professor just sits down and writes the paper, and that's it, and it's published and everybody's happy. But unfortunately, there's lots of work, lots of iterations undergoing, and we've documented all the entire process. So one paper became a 100-page document, and it's available through Springer, added with some of our words of wisdom about editorial wisdoms. Okay, choice behavior and prospect theory, cycles, premature stopping, and path dependence. We started very modestly. We ran some experiments with student subjects using a software system that was developed by Pekka Korhonen, one of our colleagues. And we found some what we called anomalies. People would violate transitivity, they would make cycles, they would just abruptly stop the search, and we were making powers comparisons. That was all we were doing. Okay. And we found results that were a bit bothering to us. Then it took us a while. We had invited Herb Moskowitz as a co-author, and we had emailed him our results and asked him that this looks strange, that what the heck is going on. And he returns, and we've documented this in the Springer book. He gets back to us and says that look at prospect theory. I think that this would explain all the anomalous behavior. Which we did. By the way, how many of you are familiar with prospect theory? Quite a few of you. Okay. Yeah, I like prospect theory. I think it's an interesting theory. Because we in our 1990 paper, we apply prospect theory to a deterministic MCDM setting. Of course, the original version that Tversky and Kahneman wrote 1979, it was for stochastic choices. But we just took 1/2 of it and apply it to a deterministic multicriteria choice situation. And it's, as you know, there are a couple of key things with the prospect theory, namely, one, people make choices with respect to a reference point. Tversky and Kahneman are kind of vague what the reference point should be, but it's kind of implicit that it's perhaps the currently available best state or choice or expected choice. For example, if for conducting management labor negotiations, and I'm management and you're labor, and I promise to give you a 5% salary increase for next year, then something happens to me, I get fired or I die in the meantime before we sign the contract, and then a new person replaces me and offers labor a 3% increase. Of course, labor is unhappy. They don't view that as +3, but -2, because the reference point is 5 + 5, because it was the expected state, the promised state. But that's one of the key ideas in the Tversky-Kahneman prospect theory, that people make choices with respect to a reference point. Okay. The people react to change. And moreover, the value functions for people with respect to a reference point are such that they're concave for gains. People are typically risk averse for gains, and they are convex for losses. And moreover, so that the slope is steeper for losses, so that the people hate to lose. Okay, that's prospect theory in a nutshell. And to our surprise, this theory would reasonably explain all the anomalies observed in our experiment, and some more. Cyclic behavior. Let's assume that we have this is a two-attribute choice, x-axis and y-axis, two choices, A and B. Coordinates are 2 and 1 and 1 and 2. And if we assume that B is your current best solution, let's assume that B is your reference point. If somebody offers you A, would you like to move to A? Then you look at what happens. If you go from B to A, the x-axis improves by 1 point, one unit, which is good. But then the y-axis decreases by 1 unit. And if you follow the Tversky function, that you react more strongly to negative stimuli, you would say, no, I don't like to move from B to A. On the other hand, if A is your current best solution, that's your reference point, and somebody offers you that, would you like to move to B? Then you look at, hey, I don't like this, that my X value would decrease by 1, because you react strongly to negative stimuli. And so it does not offset the increment or the improvement in the y-axis. So if A is your reference point, you don't want to move to B. So this is the reference point effect, and that would explain loops. And in fact, in our 1990 paper, we have one simple example where we provide numerical values for the Tversky type value functions, and we show that it can explain loops, okay, and it can also explain what others have also documented with interactive search approaches, that people don't go, they don't search for a long time. They're happy rather quickly, which has been bothering us. That if you look at optimization algorithms, classical one-objective optimization algorithms, they normally take hundreds of thousands of iterations to converge. And then if you use a human subject, why would they end up and be happy with a couple of iterations? And I think Tversky-Kahneman theory, if you are working with the efficient frontier, solutions which lie on the efficient frontier, some objectives get better, some worse, and then people hate the losses and they are quickly happy. And this same phenomenon also explains the path dependence, which has been completely ignored in the OR literature. I think Raimo has pointed attention to this phenomenon as well in some of his papers. Because the optimization literature just ignores this, they assume that it does not matter where you start, you should always end up with the same final optimal most preferred solution. But if you believe in prospect theory, if you start at A and that's your current best solution, your reference point, then you move to D, you might end at D, but if you start somewhere else, you may very well end up in another solution. And that path dependence can easily be explained by prospect theory. So we thought we were rather excited about at the time of these results. Okay, let me move on to, this is a much newer paper, but this is part of the Springer book as well. The title of the paper is Can a Linear Value Function Explain Choices? And with Tommy we are working on a newer version of this paper. The original version was for a bicriteria situation. We extended it to four criteria choice situation. Because there's old controversy. Humans seem to violate a linear value function. Yet many scholars work with the linear value function and think they work all right. How many of you have worked with the linear value function? I worked with the linear value function. We got criticized for it, but we said, what the heck? It works all right.
Confession.
And we ran some experiments. And not a big surprise, but we replicate the old finding that humans are inconsistent with the linear value function. Even a simple bicriteria, at least 30%. That's a good rule of thumb. 30–40% of people violate. The more, of course, based on binary comparisons. The more binary comparisons you do, the more attributes you have, the easier it is to violate the linear value function. Well, okay. So, but what's then the big deal? But this is how we did the experiment. We asked subjects to make 20 pairwise choices. And then we used the first 10 pairwise choices to estimate the weights for a linear value function. And we used this, what we call our max epsilon formulation. Maximize the minimum difference in the utility values between two pairwise choices. Then we got weights based on the 10 choices. Some would violate a linear value function, some would not violate. Okay? But anyway, interestingly, even in the case when you do not obey a linear value function, we can still get weights with the max epsilon formulation. And then we separated the subjects in two categories, those consistent with the linear value function, those not. And then in both cases, we used the estimated weights to predict the following 10 pairwise comparisons. And we were a little bit surprised about the result, namely that the predictability of a correct choice is high, irrespective of whether the value function is linear or not. So with a rather high 0.8–0.9 probability, it works. And we statistically tested the difference, and we were not able to find a statistical difference. So even though people would violate the linear value function, it's still all right to use it, because there's a certain degree of robustness. And this is a kind of a side story. Interestingly, if we remove two choices out of 20, what we call the troublemakers, then 85% of cases become consistent with the linear value function. And our new results with Tommy seem to generalize to four criteria case as well. But that's yet unpublished research. And then this is our kind of a tentative or cautious conclusion. Of course, if you know or if you have more information about the value function, use it. And if you know it's not linear, use it. But if you don't have such information, it's not a bad approximation to work with the linear value function, because there's a lot of robustness. Yeah, please.
But it might be that the troublemakers are caused by an excessive number of choices, so the people get tired and...
They might, even though not in the 20, with the 20 pairwise comparison. I forget, probably they were not, the troublemakers were not towards the end. But of course, if you do 100 comparisons, that could very well be the case. Yeah.
May I ask
Please.
The sample size of this experiment?
Sorry?
The sample size.
The sample size.
Right.
I think we had over 100 students. And we repeated we did first the bi-criteria experiment, now we repeated with 4 criteria.
The new study has, I think, 144 students.
144 students, yeah. So reasonable size, yeah. Okay, and a related problem, and this is a third paper, judgments of importance revisited. How many of you think that weights reflect criterion importance? You? 2? Not many. I thought it's a more common.
Yeah, because I thought about this.
Okay, you coach them. You want them that don't. But you said don't. It's not the same, right? But it's not an uncommon belief among practitioners, because you so easily think that the bigger weight would somehow reflect higher importance. But yet. And people don't have difficulty in expressing criterion important statements. Politicians have no problem telling what's the most important criterion for economic policy, but nobody knows what the heck do they mean. And we did done 2 papers. One in a bi-criteria setting, and this is the second reference, which is unpublished. In 2 experimental settings, we asked subjects to rank criteria in terms of importance first, which they often did. In the second study, we used AHP scale. And then we also estimate the weights based on pairwise comparisons. And we looked at the median rank correlation between importance and weights. In the 4 attribute experiment, it was 0.25, so not a high correlation. So that should at least alert you that don't associate weights with importance. And then the logical question is, if weights do not explain importance, what the heck does? We don't have a good answer, but I think we need new models, new research. And the quote was either Alec Morton's or Jeff Keisler's, that they refuse to make important statements because we don't have an understanding what the heck do they mean, even though politicians have no problem making such statements. Okay, getting to the last of my 4 papers. This is the question trade-off versus win-win solutions. And interestingly, if you look at the field of multi-criteria decision-making, much of the research and the methods developed, the 100 methods developed, they usually work with efficient solutions. You're generating solutions on the efficient frontier, and you're comparing solutions would lie on the efficient frontier, forcing the subjects to make trade-off choices. That's the norm, even though the first paper, MCDM paper that I ever read was the Geoffrey and Dyer-Feinberg method, which was based on a win-win idea. But that's an exception. And interestingly, much of the negotiation research in the REFA tradition tries to develop win-win solutions. And they are related fields. How come that one field is based on win-win solutions and the MCDM field is based on making trade-offs? And we, in fact, we ran an experiment with Niklas Ravaja, who's a colleague at the Helsinki University, social psychology, and he's an expert with the neurophysiological measurements. He has a lab of his own where he hooks the subjects with different monitors. We can observe their facial expressions where they frown upon, or their skin reactions where their skin gets red, like in a lie detector. And then we did not have a full MRI technology, but a little electric hat that would tells us about the brain activity. And we put subjects in front of a monitor to answer trade-off versus win-win questions. We used product baskets. And the idea is that such instruments don't lie, because if you ask people about how they thought about the choices, or in retrospect, you may not be able to tell the truth. And long story short, even though this is not a great new result, kind of expected that the subject experienced a clear trade-off aversion. So trade-offs were cognitively and emotionally harder than win-win choices. And the win-win choices, there where we had a base, a reference point, and then two solutions that offered win-wins to the base. But the difference was that there was a reference point. And the marketing, I looked at the marketing theory literature, and they have a similar finding. They talk about trade-off aversion, even though the way they define dominance is a bit different from our field. But that's, I think, an interesting, it's a hard fact. Yet, trade-off approach is so common in MCDM that perhaps we should rethink the foundations of our field. We should develop more win-win approaches if they're mentally and cognitively easier. Of course, the big question is that which approach does lead to better solutions? We did a little experiment with a postdoc last fall about this, and with the 120 kilo of fruit, but we could not distinguish. The only thing was the bananas were getting rotten, but we don't have a clear answer. But there would definitely be some research opportunities because it may be that the trade-off approach leads to better solutions, but then it's fine. Then we know that it's cognitively more demanding, but it leads to a better outcome. But if it happens so that the win-win approach leads to better solutions and it's cognitively easier, then why not develop something in that spirit? And I have an idea that perhaps an optimal MCDM tool would be a hybrid. Would start with a win-win and then do some trade-offs, determine the search direction, and then some win-win. So alternate win-win trade-off, win-win trade-off, which might not be a bad idea. And I haven't seen such theory or method development. But it's usually, if you want to have these instruments hooked to a subject, you need to collaborate with a person who has a lab and who knows how to do it. And the data analysis also requires special skills. Because it's tedious, because of course it generates almost continuously data from the monitors, and I think they discretize the data so that they look at it every 6 seconds or something, but it needs some special skills to be able to analyze.
Our recordings took 100 times a second.
Oh, 100 times a second. Okay, that's big data. Yeah. Okay. I think this is a fascinating field. Lots of opportunities for research. And this is also a fun topic to teach in a classroom. Tommy has been helping us with, we had a PhD class in behavioral decision research, and it's just a fun field. So my advice is go run experiments, and there exist many beliefs and myths that are not necessarily true and which you can challenge. And this is my philosophy, that I think we need a better understanding of how decisions are made in order to be able to support people better. But thank you. I'm happy to answer questions.